Hello everybody, it's the Alco Diesel Guy with another video for you. If you remember, I recently worked on an SD40-2, which I've since sent over to my fellow YouTuber Shane, Trains with Shane, and this is the engine I received in trade for that particular locomotive. It is none other, and you can probably guess which one it is, but I'll leave you in suspense until I get it open here. Hint, it was on his channel a while back. And here it is. It's this undecorated Alco RS-2, Atlas Alco RS-2. Actually, pardon me, RS-3 it says here. But actually it's an RS-2 as I described later on. If you'll note my comments to his particular original video, this is an RS-2. You can tell because, and I'll try to see if I can get you in deeper enough to show you. Let's go ×3. There is, if I get this top over and I'll show you better. On the very side of the engine, right here underneath the cab, we have a filler neck for the actual fuel filler thing. And this basically is a trait that only the Alco RS-2 and 1 had. The Alco RS-3, because the fuel tank was moved from underneath the cab to the center section of the locomotive right over here, had the fuel filler move as well because obviously it made sense to do so. And the reason why that was done again is because there was no room to put a bigger tank of fuel underneath the cab. There was just no more room to go. And to be honest, it probably wasn't the safest place for it to begin with. Although I'm not so sure, I must be honest, if that was the actual reason the reason that was done. So today I'm going to take a look at this engine and just make sure it works. I'm sure it is now, but in case it got damaged, considering some of the mishaps I've had with the post office handling some of my packages lately, I just want to make sure this thing didn't get hit by anything or destroyed mechanically during its shipment. I'm assuming everything will be fine, and I'm pretty sure it is, but just in case. Let me go grab my secret track from said location. Okay, track now in hand. I'm going to now give this thing a test with my trusty old DCS-50. Long-suffering DCS-50, I should say. This thing is kind of at the end of its lifespan. Now, apparently this was a DCC-equipped engine. Let me make sure my power is off before I put this on the track. Note, I've done this myself a few times, admittedly, but make sure your track status is off when you're actually putting a train on the track, because, especially with a DCC engine, as that's a great way of blowing a decoder, and hint, you don't want to do that. That will cost you money, so that's definitely not a good thing. Alrighty, let's switch this on and get some power to the track. Okay, no noise, that's actually a good thing. Let me request Loco 3 and take the brake off. Haven't used this in a while. Let's make sure it works. Aha! Yep, it does work. Good. Okay, so I can confirm this does work, which is excellent news. Now, before I go any further with this locomotive, a little background. Shane had bought this, and being it undecorated, he wasn't sure what to do with it. I'll post a link again to the original video to sort of give you a little bit more background on that in the description of this video. The long and the short of it is basically that he didn't know what to do with it since it was undecorated, and also he had a need for a Kato SD40. He expressed an interest in trading me for one of my CSX SD40s, but I wasn't ready to trade one of those off, especially since all the work I had done to get them running again. I also realized, hey, I've got another SD40 here, -2, this Santa Fe unit, which you saw me tinker with on my most recent video. That particular engine wasn't operating at the time, but I was able to swap in an analog board, as you'll see in that video, and get it up and running for him. I'll post a link to that video as well. Went ahead and did a trade for him, and that's essentially how this engine wound up in my possession. Now, the next and obvious question people are going to probably ask, and I'll answer, is what do I plan to do with this? It's an undecorated locomotive. It'll run. It runs great, in fact, but that's it. It's just undecorated. There's no cab number on it. I'd have to get to work with some art supplies to do something like that, and I am artistically challenged, to put it mildly. I have other ideas, actually. As you see, I'm kind of putting a bit of a hint by removing the shell on this. What I have here is an actual Atlas RS-3. I am told by a reliable source, I've never been able to make this happen, but I can swap the shell off of this to this. Now you're probably wondering, why would I do that with a similar engine? Why not just get this one? Why not just work with this and make it work as a locomotive? Is the drivetrain shot? No, the drivetrain is fine. The issue is, it is prehistoric. It is the old Kato drivetrain that dated back to, I think it was the mid-80s, early 90s. And there is a decoder available from TCS called the C1, I think it is, or C2, or whatever they call it, or CN, whatever. It does work. but it doesn't work all that well. The problem is there are two parts of it that slip into the chassis itself. I'll show that to you, in fact, in a second as I take the shell off of this one. And it'll work for a time, but they are known for failing after a while and having terrible contact. And I have tried, for the life of me, to install one of these things over and over again, and have had no luck getting them installed. All I've succeeded in doing is blowing out the decoder and having to send it back. I'm at the point where I just don't care anymore. Oh, look at this. This thing is falling apart. I'm not sure if I even bothered tightening this up. This is a used locomotive, incidentally, that I picked up on eBay a while back. Oh God. This thing feels so flimsy. But yeah, here's that decoder I'm talking about. The standard light board is two pieces, one in each end, I should say. The decoder would make up both of these ends and slips in with these two contact points. And unfortunately, it's flawed because this particular setup, these boards themselves, and not so much the boards because they're analog, but the digital decoders, which require consistent power without spikes in voltage, do not do well with this. They tend to fail over time. So as a result, many people don't want to, as a result, you can do what I mean, but people like myself don't want to bother with this, and I think that's why, if many of you aren't aware of this, well, I'm about to spill the beans on it. Atlas has come out with a new version of this chassis that is actually DCC and sound equipped, as well as just sound equipped and DCC ready. I've actually pre-ordered a few of these. That's where, if you're wondering where they are, well, they were pre-ordered last June, or before last June, and they were supposed to ship this past June, and it's almost mid-October as I'm making this, and you guessed it, they haven't shipped yet. So we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, back to this. What I'm going to try to do now is take this shell and put it on this engine and see if that works. And unfortunately, the long and short of it is, despite my best efforts and the fact I have seen this pulled off multiple times by other people, I still cannot get this chassis to slip underneath the RS-3 shell, something I was really hoping to be able to do. I did, however, gain some valuable insight as to why this wouldn't actually fit. Which explains why no one could get this to fit anything. This is not actually an Alco RS-3, it's an Kato RS-2. And this is not an Atlas RS-3, pardon me, or an Atlas RS-2. It is a Kato RS-2, and that's why there was so much weirdness going on trying to figure out what was going on with this model. So I've had this locomotive for a while now, and I've been thinking about what to do with it. As you know, I've gone through a few different options. I thought about trying to squeeze this onto an RS-3, Atlas RS-3, because those are so notorious to put a decoder in, and even when you do, half the time they don't work anyway correctly, or they only last so long. Then it occurred to me I had this. This is another Alco RS-2 built by Kato. This, in this case, is in one of my other favorite railroads, Paint New York Central, because it's from my general area. Actually, D&H, these are one of my favorite engines. Not quite an RS-3, but very close. So I've decided to do, of course, you can probably guess where this is going. I'm going to swap the decoder on the undecorated engine. Pardon me, the engine. I'm going to actually swap the whole chassis, pardon me, on the undecorated engine with this engine here, because this has a decoder and this doesn't. And I'm currently, I think, out of, if I remember right, yeah, I am out of decoders on this because I used one of them on my SD40-2 project. One of those two, I believe, got the decoder I had for this one. On the CSX SD40-2. So I'm going to go ahead now and carefully remove this shell again. Oh, and before I go forward, let me just give kind of the smoking gun that these are, in fact, the same engine. If you take a look at the bottom, right there, really note it says Kato. It is the exact same detailing, made in Japan. Turn this one around, actually, so you can see it differently. As you can see, again, it's the same sort of builder's plate, I guess you can call it, for model trains, and the same coupler pin on both sides. This is very clearly the same locomotive. So, without further ado, let me just do this quick little Frankenstein frame swap, if you will. Got my sponger, is what I prefer to use to get these things out. Listen, admittedly, the shell is probably going to wind up as spare parts. As the drivetrain, I'm sure I can find a use for it. I'm always buying locomotives. There we go. Finally, it's off. And you can see the difference here. This one has the analog board. I know the chief and almost Captain Obvious sort of description, if you will, is the fact that it has this sort of gray board without any chips on it, but it sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the actual DCC board installed on the undecorated unit I took apart before. I didn't bend anything when I took this off. These things are so delicate to work with. So I'm going to put it back on. And the easy way of telling where the cab goes, you see this little bump right here? That has to line up with the cab here. Again, I'm just going to slide this right over it. It should just slip right down as such. Important notation, this engine has the same black truck, so no one will ever know it was an undecorated engine that I slipped underneath it. So all I have to do now is put the other undecorated cab on top of this one and put it in my parts bin. This engine, I believe, works. If anything, this is now going to become sort of a parts bin to repair anything that is broken. I'm more concerned about having the decoder not be used for something because the decoder is worth something. Not that this isn't, don't get me wrong, but a decoder should not be left sitting around doing nothing when it can actually be put into use, rather than having me buy another decoder and having this one sit perfectly useful in its box. So, there's our engine. Let's go now test this quickly. I'm going to get my DCS-50. My somewhat trusty DCS-50, as it's really in bad shape here. I'm just going to drop this engine onto my rerailer track. I'm going to have to get one more of these tracks on my next little jaunt here, because very clearly this thing is not doing well in terms of age. Dig up my wire. Wire. There we go, wire. And it's plugged in, and let's wait a second here to get a little juice on it. There it goes, finally comes to life. This thing is very slow, and it gives me the creeps whenever it works these days, but I'm still getting what life I can out of it. So this is number 8213. Procedure is, again, program, direct mode, loco 4, 82. What did I say again? 13. Dagnabbit, 13. CBRW. And it did, and the light's flickering, so I know it worked. Let me just confirm. Take it off my programming track. Put my other track over here on it. Loco. Let's first exit out of this one. Loco 8214. And the light's on immediately. Oh, it's 8213. Ugh. I guess inflation. See, I added one number to it. Ah. Boy. This is at least that's the excuse I'm making. There we go. Light. Looks like I got control. Oh, it hesitated there. I didn't like that. Oh. Yeah, that definitely worked. I didn't like the hesitation, but it looks like it was just not quite programmed, and it just took it a second to figure out what it was doing, or this DCC system is just really that far gone. And that will do it. And just like that, I now have a running RS-2, Kato Alco RS-2 in New York Central Paint with DCC. Before I go, I'd like to give a shout out to Shane of Trains with Shane, his YouTube channel. I recommend that all of you go and subscribe if you haven't already. He does a lot of great will it run videos and repairs to these engines, getting them up and running. Again, Shane, thank you very much for the trade. This is going to be a nice little addition to my collection. This will start operating, I'm hoping, in my secret project that I'm working on, where I'm going to need some of these engines. And more on that later. Hint, hint. Anyways, always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Please like and subscribe. And as always, keep the metal side down.